Friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are. Now we've got a nice little series coming up for you, and it's with a young man who's been on a few times, many times actually, but he's so enthusiastic about his subject matter. It's not only a pleasure to talk to him, but it's always a learning experience. First I'm talking about is Arpad Szakal, and I'm always apologising to Arpad about the surname, but at the end of the day, it's your fault for having such a tricky surname. So why can't you be Arpad Smith? But anyhow, Arpad Szakal, okay, who's principal consultant with Cormis partners, and they're a research and leadership assessment firm, and they look after senior level recruitment. So Arpad, lovely to have you on board again, and thanks very much for doing this series.
Thank you, Chris, for the opportunity. And by the way, perfect pronunciation.
Yeah, all right, okay, forget Smith. Okay, I've done it. Szakal. Yeah. Right, lovely. Yeah. Now, we're doing a 6-part series, and it's a very simple title. It's people. Okay, such an important asset and value, and I don't know what else to describe it, especially at this moment, and especially in our industry. The value of people has gone up. The scarcity has also gone up. And you know, people need to spend a lot of time on this. So we're going to have a little series. Each one is going to have its own headline, shall we say? And this one is about hiring strategy, something that you're very, very good at. So from a hiring strategy perspective, if I kick it off and say to you, how well prepared are companies with this particular hiring strategy? Not just at the moment, but in general, from your experience of dealing with so many of them on a regular basis?
Chris, I think it largely depends on who that organization is, in what sector they operate in. But in the aviation sector, when it comes to the airlines, the service providers, the suppliers, the airports, I think part of our role is to do quite a bit of education in terms of what is important. I think it's basically measuring for future potential is really important, incorporating context, aligning the various stakeholders who are going to be involved in the process, especially at senior level hires, so that, I mean, you know, ambiguous, like it's stuff that when you're really not aligned on things like compensation in terms of seniority level, in terms of the industry that this individual should be coming from, well, that is basically a savvy candidate can smell that from a long way away, and that's a very big turn off. And so this context, incorporating really structure and gathering multiple perspectives, so that it's not only the HR department that is present, but even people who will probably not have anything to do with this individual on a day-to-day basis, but they're providing some neutral feedback on them. What do they think? What do they feel? Are they managing or maybe leadership quality people? So I think 50% of what we do, Chris, is really educating organizations. What is important these days? What are candidates looking? What are they looking for? How do you engage them, and how do you keep them, really? So
yeah, okay, right. So good points there. Now, one of the things I want to ask you, because when my kids were going through interviews, they, you know, naturally they were nervous, and they'd always say, you know, oh, Dad, this, that. So it's, you know, it's hard to give your own kids advice, but I always used to say, the one thing you got to think about is you're giving potentially a huge chunk of your life to the company. The company is only giving you a job. So you should be putting them under equally as much pressure, if not more, than you feel they're putting you under. And I think the younger generations at the moment, they're a lot more demanding. Their expectations are a lot higher. And yep. if they see, or, you know, everybody says you never get a second chance at a first impression, and psychologists say, you know, some cases you've made your mind up as soon as the person opens the door, sits down and introduces themselves. There's so many different factors and impressions that you can get from people. But I think now companies are actually under extreme pressure to make sure that they live up to the brand, or they live up to the image, or they live up to the perception that the person coming from the interview has got. And one of the first things I noticed when I've been for interviews as well is how impressed you are about the people sitting opposite you, because they represent that company that you're potentially going to give many years to. And that can have such a big impact initially in that interview stage. Would you agree with that?
100%. And what aggregates candidates the most, Chris, just think about it. It's like the little things. Not hearing back from a recruiter, whether it's an internal recruiter or an external recruiter or a hiring manager, people being rude or inconsiderate at interviews. I mean, it's what you see is probably what you're going to get. Not receiving enough or adequate levels of information about the role. I mean, it's surprising how many times you really just see that there's no alignment. People are not really familiar with what they're looking for or what should they be assessing individuals on, and getting conflicting information about the job or even the company. So those are the sort of 3-4 things that aggravates any good candidate. And the trouble is, Chris, that you don't get a second chance in this business. It's basically not only with clients but also with candidates. That's the trouble.
No, I agree with you, and the bit there about the way the responses are. Some people, and I've had it when I've been interviewing myself, and some people on the panel, they don't prepare themselves well enough, and they tend to ask the most obvious of questions or follow from a script sheet or a score sheet, which is so annoying, I feel. And they're not challenging the candidate. And I think if I go to the trouble of applying for a job, and I really do my research on it, I want to be challenged in that interview. Not in a really not in a terrible way, but I want to be challenged so that I feel that I've given my best. And if my best was good enough and I get the job, it just makes you feel so much better as an individual.
Definitely, that's a really good point, Chris. And what I would say, especially at senior levels, top candidates appreciate being challenged. It's basically, as long as the questions are relevant, a tough interview process drives home the point that your organization, the company that you are representing, sets the bar high, and you are serious about hiring great talent. So the challenging candidate bit is really, really good. Also, what I would add, training your team, the way your interviews are conducted, basically, it's your first impression, your first opportunity to make a positive impression. Not everyone has the interviewing skills within your organization. Not everyone is a hiring manager. Even hiring managers are very often very badly skilled or didn't have the appropriate training to ask the right questions, to look out for the things that really matter. Structure your interview process. I think that's so incredibly important. I went through a lot of these really unstructured, never-ending interview processes where you really could just see that the person who was interviewing didn't have an interest and didn't really have the context about that. So I think you can't do that these days. It's basically just send candidate surveys, understand what the feedback has been. Also with unsuccessful candidates, how did you turn them off? I mean, remember, a candidate is today's candidate is going to be tomorrow's client. I mean, you never know, or customer. So just because you don't hire them, they might be your customer tomorrow. So think with the long term in mind.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree there. And I think something you said earlier about if people make their mind up quite early on in the interview that the candidate is not right for the company, the way in which they let them go is also important.
Yeah. I mean, that's 100%. It's a very limited talent pool, Chris, at the moment. It's basically, especially in the aviation business. I mean, it's essentially, if you don't look outside of the sector, then you're essentially regurgitating people, reusing them, and you can't possibly allow yourself a bad departure or a bad divorce, essentially, because those people will tell 10, 15, 20 others, potentially very interesting candidates, who you will not be able to attract to your organization, because they will probably believe that if they were treated wrongly, then they will as well. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And one thing there, when people make a decision, because in lots of cases now they go for several interviews, and if they are good, they get offers from all of them. And it's that defining choice as to why they choose your company that's so important.
Exactly. That's why coming up with a compelling, proper pitch in terms of what differentiates your organization, and really selling them on almost like a spiritual level. Why is it better than someone else, basically? Because at the moment, any given candidate has at least 2 or 3 or 4 other processes in the meantime, basically. So you can never be sure until they really accept it that they're going to land where you want them to be. So yeah.
No, I agree. And having a storyline of how the position the party is applying for fits in with the bigger strategy and the tactical approach to the business, and also the objectives and how it supports the business sustainability of that company. I think individuals now want to have a story that they can associate with, that makes sense, that they can see themselves developing as a character within that storyline if they push themselves or if the opportunities are there.
Exactly. How does this role fit into the wider organization? How does this contribute to the wider good? Are we, am I just a cog, or basically this is something that actually makes a difference? I think, especially when it comes to the next generation, Chris, I think this meaning piece and am I making a difference to the organization really plays a very important role, basically. So you really need to come up with very compelling answers to those potentially very difficult questions. Basically, you need to create that intimacy with the client, with the candidate. Basically, like checking in with them often. Don't make any assumptions, I would say, because those assumptions will probably be wrong. Don't label people. I think that's quite important. That is very often overlook, and really find out their purpose, like their individual purpose, basically during the interview process, because purpose is not a buzzword. It actually really matters these days.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree. Yeah. Purpose and values. So important.
Yeah.
Now, so if we were to wrap up, okay, what we're actually saying is that for the interview panel themselves, they are under as much pressure as the candidate. So they should equally prepare well, as does the candidate. Yeah. But one thing that we touched on there is lots of people who are associated with their position and expected to be a good interviewer, they might not be a good interviewer, and that can be such a turnoff to the candidate. So the organisation should make sure that they've either trained the interviewer or they give the interviewer a few, simulations or opportunities to go through the process and see how they do, because there's nothing worse than being uncomfortable. I must admit, I've been in some interviews where the candidate far outweighs or is far better than the people interviewing them.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you sort of look at your own organisation, you think, oh my goodness me, what's happening here?
Exactly. I mean, those are some of the most painful situations when the candidates, the shortlist that is presented and are being interviewed, are better than the person interviewing them, basically, and then they both feel it, and it's quite awkward. Yeah. And
they both know it. Yeah, exactly. So then we've got that. So then we've got, have a solid structure for the interview, so it makes sense, and it's sequential, and it's got its own storyline.
Yep.
And then know what you want from the candidate, but also know what the candidate is expecting from you as well, which is so important. Okay. The storyline links everything, brings everything together. It's sort of like a bridge between what they're expecting and what they're looking forward to. And then the understanding what the strategy, the tactics, and also the opportunities are.
Yeah,
you've got to really sell it to a candidate now, and I think you've got to sell the job more than ever before. Yep. And a lot of interview panels and a lot of companies are still following the old way, whereby they feel they're doing somebody a favor by offering them a job.
Especially at senior levels, Chris. I mean, the people that we are in, the candidates that we are talking to, are not in the business of looking for a job. They expect to be headhunted, and you really need to come up with something that is compelling, something that is out of the ordinary for them to pick up the phone. Basically, that's how it is.
Because at the end of the day, they should be leaders and leaders of the future. So.
Okay.
Their expectations are very, very high.
Yep.
Right. first little section, first little part of the series done. Thank you.
Thank you.
So really appreciate it. So we'll have a little break now, and then we'll be back online in a few minutes for session number 2.